Your parents think you're lazy. You think they're out of touch. And both of you are absolutely convinced the other one just doesn't get it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You're both right. And neither of you is to blame. Because boomers and millennials weren't just raised differently. They were built by two completely different versions of reality. And science can prove it. Every family dinner has that moment. Someone says something about hard work. Someone else mentions student loans. Eyes roll. Voices tighten. And by the time dessert arrives, everyone has retreated to their corners. This isn't just a family problem. It's a cultural phenomenon that researchers have been studying for decades. And what they've found is both obvious and stunning. Boomers and millennials don't just disagree on politics, money, or work ethic. They operate from fundamentally different psychological frameworks. Frameworks that were built during childhood, reinforced through adolescence, and then locked in for life. Not because one generation is better. Not because one is smarter. But because the world they grew up in was so radically different that it produced two different types of human beings. This video isn't about taking sides. It's about understanding why the gap exists. And why closing it requires something most people aren't willing to do. Let's go! Let's start with the boomers. Born between 1946 and 1964, they came of age in the most economically optimistic period in American history. Post-war America was booming. Jobs were abundant. A single income could buy a house, raise a family, and retire comfortably. And that wasn't luck, it was the norm. Psychologists call this a scarcity to abundance transition. When a generation experiences genuine economic expansion during their formative years, the brain encodes a very specific belief. Effort equals reward. Work hard enough, and the system will deliver. This isn't a fantasy. For boomers, it was literally true. The median home price in 1970 was 3 times the average annual salary. By the time they retired, many owned homes worth 10, 15, 20 times what they paid. The stock market performed. Pensions existed. Social Security was funded. So when a boomer says, "Just work harder," they're not being cruel. They're reporting their own lived experience as if it were universal truth. And here's the critical psychological point. The brain doesn't easily distinguish between "this worked for me" and "this works for everyone." That distinction requires conscious effort. And most of us, regardless of generation, don't make it automatically. Now let's talk about what millennials inherited. Born between 1981 and 1996, they entered adulthood at the exact moment everything their parents told them to expect stopped working. They were the most educated generation in American history. They did exactly what they were told. Study hard. Go to college. Get a degree. Work hard. And then they graduated into the 2008 financial crisis. The worst economic collapse since the Great Depression. Student loan debt had tripled in a decade. Housing prices had decoupled entirely from wages. The jobs that existed for their parents, stable, benefit-bearing, pensioned, had been replaced by gig work, contract positions, and perpetual freelance instability. Researchers at the Federal Reserve found something devastating. Millennials have less wealth at every age than every previous generation. Not slightly less. Significantly less. At age 35, the average millennial has about half the net worth their parents had at the same age. So when a millennial says, "The system is broken," they're not being dramatic. They're also reporting their lived experience as universal truth. And here's the collision point. Both generations believe they're being rational. Both have evidence. Both are right about their own era. But neither can fully see that the economy they're describing no longer exists for the other. Here's the part that goes deeper than economics. The real reason boomers and millennials struggle to understand each other isn't money. It's identity. Boomers built their self-concept around work. Your job was your identity. Your title, your company, your years of service. These weren't just career facts. They were who you were. Psychologists call this achievement-based identity construction. When your sense of self is tied to professional accomplishment, any criticism of the work ethic feels like a personal attack. When a millennial says the system is unfair, a boomer often hears, "Your life was meaningless." That's not what's being said, but that's what's being received. Millennials, on the other hand, built their identity differently. They grew up during the rise of authenticity culture. The internet, social media, and digital self-expression created a generation that was told, constantly, that being yourself was the goal. That passion matters more than stability. That work should be meaningful, not just profitable. This isn't entitlement. This is what authenticity psychology predicts will happen when a generation is raised on the message that self-expression is the highest value. So when a boomer tells a millennial to just take the job or stop being picky, the millennial doesn't hear career advice. They hear, "Stop being yourself." That's not what's being said either, but that's what's being received. Two different identity frameworks. Two different translations of the same conversation. And both sides walk away feeling misunderstood. There's one more layer that almost nobody talks about. The role of institutional trust. Boomers grew up trusting institutions. The government, the corporation, the bank, the church. These weren't just organizations. They were pillars of a world that felt stable and knowable. And for most of their formative years, those institutions delivered on their promises. Millennials grew up watching those same institutions fail in real time. Enron, the Iraq War, the 2008 crash, the student loan crisis. By the time they reached adulthood, every major institution had broken a promise. And when institutions fail repeatedly, the psychological response is predictable. Trust erodes. Not just trust in the institution itself, but trust in the generation that built and defended it. Research from Harvard's Institute of Politics found that only 19% of millennials say they can trust the government to do what is right. For boomers, that number is nearly 3 times higher. This isn't cynicism for its own sake. This is a nervous system that learned, through direct experience, that the rules can change overnight. That the social contract can be rewritten without warning. That loyalty to a system that doesn't reciprocate is not virtue, it's naivety. The tragedy of this divide is that both sides genuinely want the same things: stability, recognition, dignity, the ability to work hard and be rewarded, the chance to live a life that feels meaningful. They just stopped speaking the same language for how to get there. So what do you actually do with this? The research points to something both simple and incredibly difficult. It's called perspective-taking capacity. Not empathy in the soft, vague sense. Actual cognitive effort to temporarily inhabit someone else's lived experience. To ask not, "Why is my father so out of touch?" but, "What world would I have to have grown up in to believe what he believes?" To ask not, "Why are millennials so fragile?" but, "What would the data show if I had graduated into their economy instead of mine?" Studies at the University of Michigan show that perspective-taking capacity is one of the strongest predictors of reduced intergenerational conflict. Not agreement, not compromise, just the genuine effort to understand the logic of a different reality. The conflict between boomers and millennials is not a failure of love. It's a failure of translation. And translation is a skill. It can be learned. It can be practiced. It starts with one sentence, said with actual curiosity instead of judgment. "Tell me what it was like for you." That's it. That's the whole bridge. If this video gave you a new way to look at someone you've been frustrated with, a parent, a child, a coworker, share it with them. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is hand someone the translation they've been missing. Next video, we go deep into Gen Z, the most anxious generation science has ever studied, and why their anxiety isn't weakness, it's a rational response to an irrational world. See you there.